flag. I mean, I just don't. I think those claims have to be dismissed up front. What I'm hearing from people who are on the inside that I trust is that we have perhaps not heard who is really in charge. Israel. Why are we in this war? Because we suddenly decided that Iran was the satanic evil element in the international system that had to be purged for anyone, anywhere in civilization to be safe? No, that's a lot of nonsense. We're there because Israel wants Iran taken off the board, which is the phrase used by the neocons in Washington. This whole thing was sold from the very beginning on the assumption that, first of all, this will be a short campaign. We would be surprised if they didn't fall apart in 96 hours. That's what I was told. Secondly, once we've taken Iran off the board, Israel is safe. It has no worries. It can bully the region. It can push its power and influence to the limits. And oh, don't worry about the Turks. We'll keep them under control. We're close with the Turks. Turks don't want trouble with us. They'll do what we say. So the attitude in Israel was fine. Then we just need to obliterate Iran. And oh, by the way, if we do this right, we and you can move in and take control of the oil fields. Never mind Iraq. Don't mind Syria. Don't mind Turkey. Forget those things. They're not important. And the Emirates, they depend on us for everything. So they'll do what we say. Well, the Emirates have discovered that depending on us is not a very good idea. We have been woefully unprepared for the attacks that have been launched against them, and they paid a terribly heavy price for our bases and their support to us. So where are we today? There is no trust between the United States and Iran. Zero. The Chinese have offered to mediate through the Pakistanis. We have not really responded to that, but we have given no evidence that we'd be interested, because the worst thing that could happen to us in the minds of people in Washington is that the Chinese supplant our power and influence in the Gulf. And the Chinese are well on their way to doing that. So you're not going to take anything that's on offer from the Chinese. Well, what about the Russians? Well, we're still trying to harm Russia. We haven't given up. We're still doing everything in our power to sustain this fiction in Kiev called the Ukrainian government. We keep helping MI6 and other countries in Europe to put standoff attack weapons in there so that periodically they can wake up the international community to the realization, look at us. We have powerful drones that can reach just outside of St. Petersburg and destroy an important oil terminal for Russia. Well, that's about all they can do. And inside Russia, as you know, there is tremendous discontent right now with the way the war is being handled. Russia, gone. We don't accept that anymore. So what do they want besides us out of the Gulf? They want change in Israel. They're not going to accept a peace with the Israelis or us as long as we continue to back Israel's campaign of mass murder and destruction in Gaza and on the West Bank. They're not going to come to peace terms with the Israelis as long as the Israelis are expanding into Lebanon and killing people there by the thousands, or expanding into Syria. So how do we deliver on Israel? Are we really in control? I don't think we are.
Yeah, no, I spoke to an Iranian as well who made the point that if they go up the escalation ladder, they can do a lot of different things. Most of them I would have predicted, but one of them I thought was interesting. That is to reward Iraq for its assistance. They could also change the borders of the region, since you mentioned the Sykes-Picot. That is, the Kuwait could be joining Iraq essentially. So there's a lot of surprises which seems to be outside our control at the moment in terms of how the region will be impacted by this. What I wanted to ask as well, though, was how do you see the region beyond the Middle East being affected? That is, especially the NATO relationship. I find this to be interesting. That is, on one hand, Trump has been arguing that NATO is now a paper tiger. Marco Rubio said, perhaps we should just, we have to reconsider this relationship. They're only there when we need to help them, not the other way around. And I kind of can understand from both sides. That is, from the European perspective, the Americans never told them, didn't inform them, never cared. And then now they want them to go on the suicide mission into the Strait of Hormuz. On the other side, the Europeans blocked the access to military bases, airspace. Poland was asked to hand over some Patriot batteries to help out the United States in the region, and they declined. So I kind of can understand where the mutual frustration comes from. But what do you think this war, though, will do to the transatlantic partnership?
Several years ago in 1991, during the air campaign, while most of us that were prepared to invade Iraq were sitting on the sidelines watching the air campaign unfold in front of us, we were literally up on the Saudi border watching all of the sorties every night that went in with bombers and various kinds of aircraft. And one night, this was very early in the morning, actually, this would have been about 4 in the morning. I was trying to get some rest, and I was suddenly awakened by a soldier. He said, "Sir, quickly, get to the CP. We need you right now." I said, "Okay, what's happening?" He said, "Well, we have a report that we're under fire." I said, "Really?" Thought that was interesting. I didn't think the Iraqis during the air campaign would risk an attack, but all things are possible. So I got up, walked into the command post, and I said, "Now what's going on?" Said, "Well, Ghost Troop, that was G Troop, has an observation post up here." That meant a couple of Bradleys up on the border, and they say they're under fire. I said, "What? You know, get this man on the phone." Well, this man on the phone was very, we have air-to-ground bombs falling on our location. Well, I've never heard of anything other than air-to-ground bombs. I haven't heard of any anti-gravity bombs. And I said, "What the hell is this man sober?" Of course, there was no liquor to consume, so I assumed he was. And the next thing I get is, "Well, uh, yeah, we need help. We need help." And one of the sergeants who was there was a very smart non-commissioned officer. He said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's all get under the artillery fire with Ghost Troop." In other words, if everybody up there is under fire, why are we going up to join them? Why don't we do something intelligent and try to find out where it's coming from and whatever? Anybody who thinks that American soldiers are stupid is wrong. They're actually very intelligent people. So finally, I got the executive officer on the phone, and he said, "Look, I'm sorry about this. This man had been watching flares that were dropped by A-10s and others, and these flares were dropped to distract air defense weaponry so that the missiles ended up being diverted by the flares and instead of striking the target." I think that's kind of what Donald Trump is asking the Europeans to do. Hey, we did something immensely stupid. We're sending the United States into a recession, and most of the world is at risk of going into a depression, all because we went into the Persian Gulf for Israel. And we've set back, the world for God knows how long, 10 years before we recover, because food, fuel, feedstocks, fertilizer, the big ones right there, the 4Fs, are screwing us. We're screwed. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's all go down to the Persian Gulf and contribute to this catastrophe. And Trump said, "Well, if you're not going to help us, well, we don't need you." This goes back to the false assumption that the North Atlantic Treaty was designed for anything other than defense. And the defense was against the Soviet Union. Period. That's it. And ever since the Soviet state system collapsed, we've been trying to repurpose the famous statement, "If NATO is not out of area, well, then it's out of business. We don't need it." And I told everybody in NATO, get smart, get out. You don't want to go to all of the hellholes that we have identified for invasion and occupation. But the Europeans, well, we're afraid, and we really need the Americans here. It's vital to our security. Okay, fine. Here we sit. Now the Europeans are saying, this is a dumb idea. Don't really want to participate in this. And why aren't we talking to the Iranians? Because the Iranians have said, look, the Strait of Hormuz is closed to countries unfriendly to Iran. That's all. Which means, even though the numbers of tankers used to average 75 a day going through the strait, now it's 3 to 4. But that number can rise provided the tankers and their destinations are not to places unfriendly to Iran. So many people are saying, well, let's talk to the Iranians. And the Americans are saying, that is unacceptable. You can't talk to those people. If you do that, you're going back to Munich. You're negotiating with Hitler. Yes, here you go. So we're in a bit of a pickle. And I think the Iranians hold the strategic initiative. They are not at the end of their rope. I think he's got to make a decision. Do I bail on this? It's a stinker. I made a mistake. Find a way to get out and blame it on other people, which is the standard Trump approach. Or do I say, no, I'm going to obliterate you? You know, you refuse to negotiate with me, the great marketer, the great salesman, then I'm going to wage a war-winning air and missile attack, and I'm going to bring in ground troops, and I'm going to cut you off from the Gulf and force the Iranians are sitting there saying, okay, go ahead. Because if you're going to put ground troops anywhere in that area, you have to neutralize all the strike weapons, neutralize the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance network, stop all potential air defense, including shoulder-fired missiles. Because if you can't do that, first of all, they may never reach the destination. They may be shot out of the sky before they get there because they're going to have to fly in. I don't see a massive amphibious assault working. That means that they have to get there without already being identified in Kuwait or Bahrain or the UAE. And don't see that happening. So I think the Iranians hold the strategic initiative. And we stand an excellent chance of ending up like a giant a 14 or 15 or 16 or 18 wheel truck headed down the side of a mountain for a concrete wall. We'll just end up battering ourselves against a concrete wall one more time.
I heard many commentators argue that if the U.S. could just control the coastline, then they would be able to control the Strait of Hormuz. They don't seem to recognize that there's a vast amount of territory behind the coastline of Iran, which can also be used to target. But either way, the coastline would be it's a vast area, so it doesn't really make much sense, especially if one hasn't planned for this in advance. But
well, what about Bandar Abbas? That's a city of 580,000. They also have a uranium mine that's not far from the city where they harvest yellow cake. They also have a desalination plant there. The desalination plant could be destroyed. That would harm the people that live in Bandar Abbas. But I think they have some backup plans for that. But the bottom line is, what are we going to do about that? The islands all sit in proximity to Bandar Abbas. If you can't control Bandar Abbas, what makes you think you can control these little islands? In other words, it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't. And the Iranians may take the position, let them all land, and then we just erase the islands. And see, this has been a problem that we've been dealing with in all of our war planning for years. You have the Marine Corps and the Navy that want to repeat World War II. They talk about island chains. Well, unless the island is about the size of Borneo, the island is going to be annihilated from the air. Top attack, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, they'll all land on top of you and kill everybody on top of the island. And we've attached so much significance to little islands without understanding they no longer hold the strategic value that they did 80 plus years ago. They're just an invitation to lose people. And that's the other issue. Assuming you get on there and you can survive for any length of time, how do you feed yourself? How do you evacuate wounded? And then ultimately, how do you get out when it becomes clear this is a dumb idea? At least the British in the Dardanelles were able to pull vast numbers of ships into the Dardanelles and systematically evacuate the 500,000 troops that were there. That's not so easy in the Persian Gulf. You know, if you stand above Karg Island and look down, you're on top of an escarpment. All of the terrain is very high and it's very, very steep. So what are you going to do on those islands? The other thing is the notion that all of the oil will cease to move at that point is false. The Iranians have other means of exporting oil. Now, they're making a lot of money right now. That's obvious. They're charging toll. But again, you listen to the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, and others. They're very intelligently saying, look, we need to end this. We'll get together. We'll have a commission. Maybe we sign a treaty that guarantees access to the Strait of Hormuz. We did that after World War I for the Dardanelles. We have a treaty. The Turks control the strait, but it's all carefully measured. It's all carefully managed. The Turks do not arbitrarily say you can come and you can't. They haven't done business that way. That can be organized as well. But the key thing is we can't be in the Gulf. Our time there is now over. And if we can't be in the Gulf, I don't know where else we're going to be.
Well, this could have fit within Trump's wider plan. If the goal was really to pull out of Europe and the Middle East, then, well, this is really the time. He can clearly argue that the Europeans weren't reliable, that the Middle East should look after their own problem and then focus on the Western Hemisphere and East Asia if this is the main objective. But a key problem, though, is Israel here, because the US and Israel do appear to be joined by the hip. And Israel, of course, has been pushing hard for this war for several decades now. It finally has the war. If Trump now decides, no matter how he wants to end it, even if he just declares victory, we don't need the Strait of Hormuz, we'll go home. Where does that leave Israel? Because if they're locked in a war with Iran, which they don't want to end, is the US still able to leave? And if the US is able to leave, what do you do with a vulnerable Israel armed with nuclear weapons, which is not ready to give up this fight against Iran? I mean, it's, one doesn't want to be hyperbolic, but on the other hand, this is a very strange situation to be in, and there's a lot of desperation, and a lot of countries have bet all or nothing on this conflict.
No, Glenn, you're absolutely right. The key thing to remember about NATO is that once you leave the Beltway, you drive across America, the vast majority of people don't even know what it is. And if you ask people, do you know that we have U.S. Army ground troops in Germany? They'll say, really? I didn't know we had any troops in Germany. And some people who are moderately smart and educated will say, why, after 80 years, do we still have troops in Germany? So I don't think that's a big deal here at home. Now, you'll have all sorts of people in Washington who will hurl abuse at Donald Trump for destroying NATO, the greatest alliance there. It's all crap. Nobody cares. The electorate does not care about that. But they care about the economy. And this is accelerating very bad trends. If you talk to someone like Alistair MacLeod, he says this is the end of fiat currency. And all you have to do is point to the rise of the value of gold, and as gold goes up, the value of the dollar goes down, down, down. We are seeing in real time the yuan petro take shape. In other words, instead of a petrodollar, you get the petro-yuan. I think that's coming. And the interesting part is it's going to be backed by gold. China has been hoarding gold, purchasing gold, buying gold. It has a vault in Riyadh, a vault in Hong Kong. It's real. That's the future of BRICS. That's where they're headed. Now, will it ultimately encompass a basket of precious metals or something? I have no idea. But it's going to be based on some tangible, concrete value, and right now that's gold. Now, we can't do that. We just can't. So what do? Do we watch our currency go down the toilet? A lot of people think that's where we're headed. And Nassim Taleb, you know him, the man who originated this idea of the black swan, he's been saying for months, and I agree with him, that frankly speaking, gold is now the reserve currency. It's not the dollar. And if the yuan is backed by gold, well, I guess yuan will become the petro-yuan. So I think we've lost. We've actually lost by this stupid action, all because of Israel's greater Israel imagination and aspirations, and because the Israelis hate all of their neighbors, think all of their neighbors are inferior and deserve to be essentially exploited, bullied, and run and governed by them. It's not going to happen.
So how does this end then? I mean, if Trump doesn't pull back, again, it's hard to say. He made some reference to this, but again, he pretended to do peace negotiations, during 2 surprise attacks. So again, I do think at some level he doesn't want this war, that his intentions from not just the first presidency, but the second was to avoid these kind of things. But now that he's in this war and he can't really afford to pull out, it seems. What are the options for Washington here? Can they, I mean, do they put boots on the ground? Do they try to invade Yemen? Because, if Yemen shuts down the Red Sea, I know it's a huge country. It's like, what, 34 million people? I wouldn't want to enter this country, but again, desperate situation results in foolish policy. So what do you expect to happen from here on?
Well, one of two things. Either he announces, I've decided unilaterally to end our involvement in this war. And I welcome the opportunity to negotiate with the Iranians and to assist in any way possible to return the Persian Gulf to normalcy. That's an admission that he made a mistake, which is fine. He made a mistake. I don't know if that'll happen or not. Personally, I would welcome that development. But I think the Israel connection really makes it impossible at this stage. We don't understand the connection that Israel has to Trump. I don't understand all of it, but I understand enough to know that, yes, you're right. When I spoke to him in April of 2020 in the Oval Office, it was supposed to be short, turned into a longer session. And I was enormously impressed with the things that he had to say. And one of the things that was very clear to me is he didn't want a war with Iran. In fact, he was looking for some sort of negotiated agreement. And I'm sure he felt